So I'm going to talk a little bit about the first major excursion that we went on, which was to an island which begins with an M, and I can't remember the rest. The rest of it is the one that's got the famous red torii gate and shrine. Mijayima, I think. Yeah. And that was beautiful. Very famous site in Japan. We were taken by coach to the ferry port, and then we got the ferry over with lots of other people. And one of the things that we've often been sort of told is that, oh, Japan's so busy now, it's so crowded you can hardly move. And I won't lie, there were lots of people on the island, lots of people particularly looking at what they call the floating shrine, which is the actual shrine building, and then the gate itself. But actually it didn't feel crowded at all. It felt really quite peaceful. But I'm guessing there are glitches if you go to Japan when the cherry blossom's out, or if you go in the fall when the leaves have changed. Sort of late March and late October, I'm guessing, are the real pinch points. And then of course August, it's unbearably hot. Everybody says that. But going in May, it's a really lovely time to visit the country, and although there's always lots of visitors, I think the way the Japanese organise everything is very calm and organised, and you just don't feel as though you shouldn't be there, that you're one of too many people. To me, there isn't that feeling of over-tourism, but maybe that's the time that we decided to go. So anyway, we alighted from the ferry, and we had a guide called Joy, who was lovely. She had a really good voice so we could hear her, and she talked to us about the importance of the shrine, and how important it is in the Shinto faith to have these shrines, and the significance of the torii gates as well. And she told us lots of information on the coach, so we weren't just sat there, we were actually listening to her talking about all the different things you could expect to see. And it was lovely. So we walked around the shrine, we walked around the actual torii gate. The torii gate itself is on a beach, and at high tide it's completely surrounded by water. We were there at low tide, but you could see the tide marks, and you could walk right out to the shrine and look at it. It really is very impressive, and it's red, and according to the time of day, the colour of the red changes as the sun shifts in the sky, so that again gives it a kind of magical quality. And red, of course, is a very important colour in Japanese culture and faith. So it was lovely to walk around there, and then of course there's plenty of commercialism. There are lots of shops you can go to. I actually did treat myself to a kimono because I fancied one of those for a long time, and a pair of chopsticks because I've been using those quite a bit whilst in Japan eating Japanese food. We also bought the obligatory fridge magnet because we collect them, and we've also got we're calling it our travel tree, which is basically a Christmas tree with lots of decorations from around the world. So we're adding to that nicely on this trip. So we had a wander around, then we got back on the ferry, and we took the coach back to a large hotel in Hiroshima, or Hiroshima, as I call it Hiroshima, lots of people refer to Hiroshima. I'll refer to it as Hiroshima because I think that's probably a more local way of referring to the place. And Hiroshima is an incredibly smart city. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But the coach took us to a huge hotel, and there we were treated to a 3-course Japanese meal, and it was beautifully done. The hotel itself is very famous for having hosted the G7 summit. I've just been corrected here by my other half. G7 summit, and people like President Macron were there, Rishi Sunak was there. They had the G7 summit. Who else? Joe Biden, yes, the previous president of the USA. They were all there in 2023 having the G7 summit. So it's a well-known hotel, beautiful, huge entrance lobby. Anyway, we went up the second floor, we went to this large room, and we sat down. It was beautifully laid out, and we had this selection of what I would call starters or appetizers, and then we had the main course, which was a teriyaki chicken, And it was quite pleasant. The only thing I didn't care for was the egg custard. That was a bit yuck. I didn't eat that. And then we had dessert was a strawberry cheesecake. That's right, and that was beautifully presented as well. So we had the meal, and then we were back on the coach, and then we were taken to obviously the very famous part of Hiroshima, which is where the Peace Garden is, and it was an incredible experience actually to see the building, that a very well-known town hall public building that was one of the few buildings that was left standing. Most people know something of the story of Hiroshima and what happened, but I'll just sort of refresh memories really. So it was 1945 when the bomb was dropped, August the 6th, 1945, and it was the world's first used atomic bomb, and it was dropped by the Americans. And the reason given was to bring the war to Japan to a close, because the war in Europe, and today is, the day I'm recording this actually, happens to be the 80th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, VE Day, 8th of May 1945, and it's today is the 8th of May 2025, so very significant. But when the war in Europe ended, the war in Japan continued. And just as a little aside, my dad was fighting the Japanese. He went out to war in 1943, joined the Royal Navy as a 17-year-old, and went out and fought the Japanese, came home in 1946. And one of the things that a lot of service personnel felt who were fighting the Far East was that they were the forgotten army. They felt that the war in Europe had ended, everything was over, everyone was celebrating, and yet they were still slugging it out against the Japanese. And the Japanese were what my dad would describe as fanatical fighters. He used to refer to them as fanatical. They really believed in the war that they were fighting, and they were prepared to make enormous sacrifices to not end the war. They wanted to keep going and preserve the land that they'd taken. And because this part of Southeast Asia is so full of islands, they literally fought island to island. The famous Battle of Iwo Jima, for example, where so many service personnel died, so many servicemen died. And the Japanese proved to be an incredibly difficult nation to fight. They didn't believe in surrendering. They wanted to keep going, and they threw their all into it. Civilians were mobilised, and mainland Japan was ready to fight to the very last person. So President Truman wanted to end the war, and so he gave the order that only an American president can give, that the atomic bomb would be used. 5 sites were selected, and eventually 2 cities were selected, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the bomb, was quite a small looking thing, it's called a Little Boy, was dropped from the Enola Gay on the 6th of August 1945 at 8:15 in the morning. So very, very well known time and date. And that single bomb instantly killed somewhere in the region of 100,000 people. And Hiroshima was flattened. The intensity of the bomb, nobody had seen anything like it before, and the city was flattened. But there were a few buildings left standing, and this particular building, which is now the Peace Memorial, all the outside walls were blown off, but the dome was left intact. And it's become a poignant reminder of the devastation suffered by what was a civilian target. The people of Hiroshima were living in a civilian city. And of course we hear horrific stories of some of the burns that people sustained, the awful, awful radiation sickness that people suffered from. And when you go to Hiroshima, you not only see the building, there's the Peace Garden, there's the Children's Memorial where you can ring a bell for all the children that were killed in that blast. But there's also the museum, and that's very, very sobering. So we went into the museum, and it's just it almost looks like a motorway bridge. It's a very simple structure, and you go in one end, and you walk through these galleries, and you come out the other end. And there was this atmosphere of real silence as people walked through and, looked at the photographs and all the artefacts and things like clothing that was burnt and various objects which were just sort of torched and warped in the sheer heat. The heat of the bomb generated a heat of over 1,000 degrees centigrade. I believe it was hotter than the sun. I don't know the exact scientific facts on that, but I know it was an explosion, and it shocked the world. And the Japanese didn't surrender immediately. So 3 days later, another bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. And then after the 9th of August, the Japanese surrendered, and the war in Japan, or the war in Southeast Asia, was finally over. And there's lots of reasons historians have talked about why the bomb was dropped. Was it just to end the war? The American government calculated that by dropping the bomb they would save over 1 million lives because it would stop the fighting more quickly. That's one reason. Another reason why the bomb was dropped was that after the Potsdam Conference of July 1945, Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, and Truman, the leader of the USA, weren't exactly good friends. They didn't exactly get on together. And the Soviets had already pushed their army into Eastern Europe, and so the idea was that the Americans wanted to show the Soviets, we've got this big weapon, and you need to stop taking over land and just just slow down a bit, because we've got this big weapon and we are the most powerful country, and we're showing you we're the most powerful country by using this weapon. And so the Manhattan Project had developed this weapon, and the Americans wanted to show that they could use it and show their power in the world. And so they used that as well. And of course, a few years later, the Soviet Union also developed the first atomic weapons, and then of course the arms race started. So that's another reason why the bomb was used. The Americans were looking to use it and show that they've got this weapon. But whatever the reason for dropping the bomb, the impact was horrific for the people of Hiroshima, and it was an awful thing that the people of Japan, particularly Hiroshima and the outlying districts, had to deal with. And decades later, there are still people who are afflicted by that bomb in a variety of different ways. So going to Hiroshima is, if you come to Japan, it's an absolute must. It's one of those sites that I think just stays with you. And the city is beautiful. It's been completely rebuilt. It's very modern. It's still got the tramway. You can see the vintage trams zizzing around all over the place. But it's got a real elegance to it. It's a really stunning city. And it's one that we really enjoyed and really appreciated. And we were very humbled to visit.